All right, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Nathan McClellan. I am the chair of the Morgan City Planning Commission. Today is August 31st, and we are convened for a special session of the Morgan City Planning Commission. This meeting is being recorded. It's also being streamed live on YouTube for those of you that are joining us virtually. We have one item on our agenda this evening, and that item is a historic guideline review of a sign on 185 Commercial Street, the Red Rock Archery business. And this particular agenda item is one that was a previous conversation, and the applicant was asked to come back with some samples. I missed that particular meeting. Jim, I wouldn't mind if you had a thought or could recap a little bit of what brought us to this special session.
Sure, Mr. Chair, thank you. Again, the applicant brought forward a proposal to the commission for their sign, and we looked at it, and it didn't meet the color palette and so they asked if they could submit some samples according to the sign that was recently approved with the Morgan Fish Company. I think that's the correct name of the company. And so they asked us to entertain that green that was on that particular sign, because again, we had recently approved it and it's not on the color palette. And so Mr. Francis made a proposal that they bring back swatches or chips. And I think Mr. Woods asked if they could bring it back on the material so we could see exactly the shade that they're requesting, because last meeting we had about 4 different copies on whatever, and it all had a different tint. And so that's why we asked them to do that. And Mr. Reese proposed that we have a special session allowing them to bring this back to reconvene for this one item to, if we so choose to approve, but the intent of the special meeting was to allow them to go forward so that they can have the signage made for their grand opening, which is to convene, I believe, on the 2nd of October, if I recall. And so that's the background of what happened. And so the vote was unanimous that we table the item till the special session this evening, contingent upon the applicant bringing in the samples. And at that point, we were going to have discussion on where we want to go forward, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. That being said, do we have a representative from the project, the applicant here? It looks like we do. That can share a little bit more about the context of the project and the color samples.
Okay, yes, there's 3 of us here. Anyway, so what I did is I went back to the place that's doing our signage and said, I need something really dull. No, actually I didn't. I actually went and said, we need something. That was a joke. Okay. The line was considered too bright. So I asked them to show me some earth tones. And I even went down from some that they showed me because I felt like that still might not be exactly what you're looking for. So I picked 2 colors to bring that down and to maybe make it so it's not neon looking and not bright, but kind of still fit in with ours. Our colors are going to be much brighter on t-shirts and hats. We'll still go with that. But for our signage, I did ask them to please show me some colors to bring it down. So I didn't even pick choices that I wanted, but I did pick 2 that I felt like would be classy or not too bright and still be okay with the street.
And tell me more about the choices that you wanted.
Brighter. Okay, so when we talked about even the color that we had originally, they named it lime green. I didn't feel like it was a lime green, and that was part of the discussion that we had here. It was really hard with all the colors. So what I did is I went by the fishing sign that was by Morgan, and we tried to match that. That seemed to have been okayed. And So I even tried to go down maybe a little bit more than that or a little bit different than that color. So that's how we came up with this color. My colors, they felt like might be a little bit too bright or neon-y, I guess. They don't want anything like that, which I agree. I mean, Commercial Street's a great street, but a little bit of color, I think, only adds to it and adds to its appeal a little bit if it's done tastefully. So these are the colors that I felt would be tasteful for our sign. Archery is a very, we feel like archery is kind of a bright when you think of archery. So again, we can go ahead and do our hats and our shirts and everything we want that way with a brighter color, but the sign we have tried to bring down.
Is it your intent? So with the signage that we're looking on the screen right now and the rendering that was below, is your intent that the permanent signage will include these toned down colors? But that's permanent signage and within the shop and potentially in the window dressings and those kinds of things, you may have the brighter color displayed.
No, nothing on the window dressings or anything like that will be brighter. I'm just talking about our t-shirts and our hats will be brighter.
And inside the shop.
Yeah, inside the shop, but not like along the windows or anything like that.
Okay.
Nope.
Our true colors are fluorescent green. So they're quite bright. That's what'll be on our shirts and hats.
Okay. Thank you. That being said, let's review, some of the guidelines within the historical overlay district, which you should be compliant with. So we'll look at these color swatches.
If I could request the actual palette, do we have that too, please?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm just going to read from the historic commercial overlay zone that has been established to give us the guidelines we need down there. And it's 10-14090. And this is what it says. It says color selection shall be reviewed by staff and decisions ratified by the Planning Commission. There is adopted herewith a color palette with approved paint colors for use within the district. That palette includes those colors illustrated by comparable to Williamsburg Reserve Collection, which includes a collection entitled Historic Homes. As a business owner, I'm feeling that they're paying on this a little bit, but from Planning Commission side, it seems like it's pretty spelled out. And I know there's some concern about the fishing sign. And that's more, there's some of that green, but it's an accent to the overall sign. And so I'm thinking it's pretty well spelled out here to come first to kind of get an idea of what's acceptable in the historic overlay zone and then kind of proceed from there.
Thank you, Mr. Woods, for reading that for us. Has everyone had a chance to review the color palette that was sent out and the color swatches?
I didn't see the color on the back of the panel of the pamphlet there. Is there another green on the back of?
It's just this one, right? I think that's the color. It's only this one, am I right? It's only this page.
Oh, okay.
Metallic.
So two thoughts come to my mind just with that first pass. One, those two samples are still brighter than what's depicted in the color palette. Within the language, it says day glow paints and garish colors are not permitted in the district. Limited metallic paint may be allowed. Not that these are day glow or necessarily garish, but they're definitely brighter than the palette calls for. What other observations do you have?
The overt green is at the most toned down. I assume that one looks a little more of a matte than it does on the gecko.
One thing I did, a little research, went down and looked at the fish sign. I mean, because I know that's one of the things in question. And that green happens to be about 15 to 20% at most of that sign. And I think here we're looking at the majority, well, at least of the Red Rock obviously is a lot more subdued, but the big 11-foot R&R is that's a lot of green. I mean, I know what you're asking for. You're asking for fletching green. I get it. I'm a bow hunter myself, and I appreciate that. But I'm just trying to go off of what we're asked to do as far as the codes and different things. And then you folks asked us to look at that other sign. And again, I'm guesstimating 15 to 20% of that sign is that color. So I just throw that out there is feedback.
I kind of like that as well. And I agree with Mr. Reese that the overt green is clearly the more matte version of this. And there's a couple of things, as a body, our responsibility is to make sure that the projects and land use is done in accordance with the ordinances as they exist for Morgan City, regardless of how we might personally feel about it. And based on what Vice Chair Brown has said, we have a color palette, and I'm not an expert with art and colors and those kind of things, but these are clearly still more bright than the green tones that I'm seeing there. And so it's a little bit of a pickle that we're in.
So if green, how can the fishing sign, even if it's an accent color, have green? It's not in the palette. So if you're going to allow an accent color, do you have that? I mean, is that a rule? I don't know. This is my first time at this, so, but
It's a good question. I'd have
I
to
mean,
go back
if
and
it's
look.
not in the palette color, how come it can be put up?
But better yet, on that fishing sign, there's about 5% that fits in to your color palette. The whole other sign's out of your color palette.
You got probably 30% that's blue.
Thank you. Does anyone have a comment on that?
And just so you know, I know that Mark and all these guys knew when I was trying to pick the colors, I thought, okay, I know that we have to stay kind of within the colors and stuff like that. So I didn't think when I went and looked at the fishing sign, when I picked the first color, I wasn't thinking that because this was bigger, I wasn't thinking that. I just assumed, okay, it's here, so this must be a color that's okay. And so if you want us to match that exact green in that fishing sign, we could even do that. So that was my reasoning when we were trying to pick colors, because we went through this with Red Rock Precision that we own, when we went through colors and stuff like that. So I truly do understand, what you guys have to do too. But I think that being opened a little bit, even as maybe there's more businesses down there, but not to get out of us. I do understand, but that was my whole purpose when we first picked the green. I thought, oh, this must be okay. So I didn't think it mattered if it was this size or that size when this originally took place, when the first color was picked.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the context for that. It is a great point that you bring up. I don't recall the context exactly of the fishing sign. It very well could be a similar situation where they're indicating it's an accent. and we'd have to go back and look at the minutes to see exactly what transpired when that was approved. But maybe it was a matter of making an exception in that case. I don't know. Where does the line stop? So that was an accent color. Now this becomes a primary color. Then the next business comes in and they said, well, we want to go this direction. And you went with that whole big sign. So it can create a downstream effect.
The fishing sign's got green, blue, and Red Rock archery should be able to have green. You know, that, to me, that's the line. So if you let them guys do the green and blue, then, you know, where's the line there?
Sure. Mr. Reese has a,
You guys in a bad spot, but, you know, I'm not trying to be hard, but I'm just saying, you know, there's no clear line.
you're right. And let's keep talking through it, Mr. Reese.
So a couple things here. I remember the meeting that we went through these signs. And to be completely honest, I think we all need to own up to this. We didn't go through the color palette. We did not. We did not go look through and compare that green on that fishing sign to what was allowed in that color palette. So I think we need to own up to that. The question then becomes, you know, what do we do about it there? We were more concerned about the coffee sign that was just big and bright that ended up getting put there anyway, even though that was the one we debated the most. But we need to make sure that we need to acknowledge the fact that we didn't do that. My other question and comment here, when was that color palette adopted? Do we know that?
3 years ago, wasn't it? Yeah, I believe it's 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
Since I've been on it, well, I've been on it about 8 years.
And the purpose behind it was to keep things in a historic, calmer manner, right? So my honest dilemma here is, if you look down the street signs that are already existing here on Commercial Street, there are very few that have actually abided by these. I know some of them were grandfathered in, but very few have actually abided by that. And you can absolutely see why this is a tough thing for them, because they're seeing that and wondering why we need to abide by this. And I think they understand our position, because holy cow, we've got a color palette that we're now stuck here. But the point of this, and I know where I struggle, is we want businesses here on that street, and we want businesses to get in there and survive, and we need to do our best to support them within this. And I think we should look at this in two ways here. One is we can strictly adhere to what the approved color palette is, or if I understood the last meeting correctly, you can actually amend it. Is that accurate? And you can actually add a color that is allowed in there. And I know it could be a slippery slope, because then it's where is that line? Where does that line draw? But my point is, you've got signs that already do not fit the color palette all up and down the entire street. So we must acknowledge that as a body as well.
Some of those signs are national franchise or whatever else.
But is that allowed then, if it's a national franchise?
I don't
Because we know
but
that in other
that's what was
cities.
explained to me last time. I mean, I haven't. You got to remember, let's put this in context. We were not the governing body
Right.
of the historical district until a year and a half ago, roughly. Before there was an actual committee that met, and then it came to us and it was pre-approved, and then it went to the city council, or I don't remember exact, maybe it went to the city council, but Mr. Chair, about a year and a half ago, this fell upon us. We had to learn a lot. And so, yeah, to your point, we have not approved everything, and the fish line, I do know we're involved. The other one that we are active or heavily involved with was the hotel. And we made them, or we asked them to strictly adhere to the color palette, and actually delayed some progress, if I recall. But at the end of the day, they did adhere strictly to the color palette, and they tweaked some of their national intent to fulfill our city code.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So I'm sitting here listening and I'm kind of torn. I feel for him, but I hear a couple things. Back up a little bit. one of the intents of this, the planning commission to take over the historic overlay is to establish some consistency from here and 30 or 40 years down the road. And some of them older places are probably going to eventually move out. And so I guess we got to ask ourselves, is two wrongs make a right here? Two green signs, it's not in the palette, is that okay? The other thing I would, I've heard, I'm sorry, what's your name? Kurt?
Oh, sorry, Carol.
Carol, sorry. And I've heard in the last two meetings, you say a sentence over and over again. Well, I looked at it and I decided that this would be okay. Okay. It's a lot of money. You're putting a sign. And it sounds like in the back of your mind, you thought, I'm walking on that tightrope right here a little bit. And so you ask yourself, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you've said a few times, and I looked at it and I decided this is the color that I wanted. And I understand that, but I guess it would have been easier just to propose it first.
No, that's not what happened with me at all.
Okay.
No, actually, when we were trying to decide colors, I went down to look at the street for different things, but it wasn't, but when I, like I said earlier, when I seen that, I thought this is a color that's okay. Another question I have, when you guys talk about the historic part of it, are we talking about buildings only? I mean, is signage anywhere written that it's the signage too? Just wondering, because like that scene, if we stick, and I get the buildings, that's wonderful, but bringing a little color or something into that street, as long as it's not, like you said, distasteful or anything like that. So that was my question there is, are we talking, is there something written that talks about the signs, the signage specifically? Are we talking about the buildings? You know, I was just curious about that.
There is, it talks.
So just to that, we have actually, we should have maybe started with an introduction. We have a new planner. So,
But let's introduce our new planner.
yeah, so this is Wilf Summercorn. He's our new planner for the city. So we're actually in between planners, and he is a reference though, can help us with the wording and that's what I forgot to introduce. Like,
This is small.
yeah, well, so he is the resource, right? So he can chime in on those.
So you got a lifeline.
Question about signage.
So there is a,
Like, I mean, it's like, hey, welcome to day one. But anyway, it comes with a lot of planning experience. He's done this for several years. We're really excited to have him on contract. That sounds like that question came up should be for staff plan.
That's why I was looking for Mr. Garsine.
Yeah.
Because he has he also has a historical perspective. Is he not involved with this anymore either then?
No. So we'll probably have him for like a month's transition or whatnot, but Will has enough planning experience to replace both Weston
and it's pronounced Wilf. Wilf.
Yeah, it's short for Wilford.
Well, welcome.
So yeah, it's Wilford Summercorn, or I go by Wilf. I have been involved in planning for 40 years. I worked at Davis County for 27 years. Was director there for 14 years, and I became Salt Lake City's planning director for 6 years, and then Salt Lake County's director of regional planning and transportation for 5 years. And so I've seen a few things. And in Salt Lake City, we of course have a very substantial historic district. And the ordinances that drove me crazy, but they were, very intended to achieve some things in the city. And I haven't spent a lot of time with your ordinance, but I guess just looking at it, and then with the comment that the lady here just made, it just got me to like I should jump in at this point if I could. And so looking at the ordinance on that, I don't have a section number, but I have a page 1050. But there is a section there that talks about color and about the palette. But when I look back on what section that is in, it really all relates to the architectural features of the building. And so that all seems to refer to the building itself. Then a little bit further on in page 10-58, it does talk about signs. And all it says about the signs in there is that
We're looking at a subsection that's printed out.
Is it one I can pull up? On the page? Sorry, it would really, if everyone's looking at the same.
That'd be awesome.
The one that I see mentions sign lighting, and the lighting design should enhance one's ability to perceive and interpret the historic character of the buildings. So it's specific to the lighting.
the lighting, yeah, but there is actually a part,
There are some
says
on
sign
sign
content.
materials. Painted wood and metal are appropriate. Unfinished materials, including unpainted wood, are discouraged. Highly reflective materials are inappropriate. So we do have guidelines that are listed here. I just don't have the corresponding code number.
yeah.
But one thing that I would add, and I think it's important, is as we look to do what we're trying to do, as Vice Chair mentioned, in the last year and a half where we became the governing body to look over these. A lot of times our focus will be based on what the planning concern is at the time. And I feel like we don't have everyone listening. Could we get one person speaking at a time, please? We'll give you a chance to have the floor. When we got together in our planning commission meetings, typically our focus is based on whatever might be some of the planning issues that have come out of preparation with staff. So when you come before us, it's not necessarily the first time. You've been working with the city for a while. And if there are planning concerns, then that's where we focus. So in the case Mr. Reese brought up, we were more focused on a different particular issue and not necessarily reading and checking off every line of the code, because some of that happens as it goes through the staff process. That's true in the historic district or any other project that comes before us. We don't focus on every aspect of the code. We focus on the planning issues that were brought before us as we meet, and then we're supposed to do our due diligence and come prepared for that. As he pulls this up, it does look like there are provisions specific for signs. And just speaking on its own with this particular project, I agree with what's been shared with respect to the desire to promote business growth on Commercial Street. I think that's important and a vital part of our community feeling. These aren't consistent with the color palette. They don't seem to grossly distort the intent of what we're trying to do. So personally, in forgetting what's written in the code, it's not something that I have an issue with and can support. We just need to reconcile that. And so that's what this conversation is about, is trying to reconcile what is appropriate. If we continue to move that boundary, that line, based on what precedent might have been set with the fishing sign, and now we set with the archery sign, and then we set the next one. That's my primary concern. It's not this project on its own. On its own, could probably move forward with something like this. It's what does it mean for the feel of the whole street as it continues to evolve. That being said, you are having a discussion amongst yourselves. What would you like to share with the public?
It was just a private conversation. He kept tapping me. I said, don't tap me.
Well, school is back in session, so it's on my mind.
Mr. Chair, if I can, we've got that section of the code up. So the palette
Absolutely.
language, as I mentioned, as I indicated, seems to refer to the architectural features of the building. Then there is a section on signs. And in that section, this item number 2 right here says, use colors for the sign that are compatible with those of the building front. That's all it says. That's pretty subjective. And, that's something that I guess you can all decide whether you think what they're proposing is compatible with the building front.
I truly understand what you guys are going through. I come from a long political family too, so very much aware of planning commissions and stuff like that. Here's the thing, if as that commercial street grows and as again, you come again in another business, is it so wrong that if a business does have a color and I know you probably don't want to do this over and over, but to maybe hear the business out like you are with us, and we really appreciate you meeting tonight so that we can get our sign up. Yes, thank you. So, and I really understand that how you want that street to not be. I think the word is distasteful. You want it tastefully done. So in my mind, if signs and that, as long as the buildings are historic and if the signs are done tastefully, and the planning commission can agree, is it so bad to review signs? Giving somebody a color palette for a sign is really hard, unless maybe you added some more colors on that color palette and say, these are our colors, to give it a little bit more variety, that it's maybe not so dull, or that maybe will go with the business itself. That's just a comment.
Thank you for that, Vice Chair.
So are these 2 samples permissible to you folks? What?
Yes, those are the ones that after
Maybe not
looking.
desirable, but permissible.
Sorry, what?
Maybe not desirable, but
Yes,
permissible.
yes, that's right. Not desirable for me. Definitely not for me. I was the one, and these 2 really I didn't give them a say. So it was, so not desirable for me, but I felt like it would be permissible and would be more tasteful for maybe what you were looking for when I asked for them to show me earth colors.
Well, I guess my point is, with what they've just shown us in here, I don't see that we have to abide solely by the palette if it fits with the facade of the building. Am I seeing this incorrectly?
Mr. Chair, just a very quick sampling of as many historical color palettes for other cities I can. Ours is extremely limited with that. And I think for a later meeting, we should even consider that is expanded to be a much, much larger palette if we're going to try to not have to have this discussion on a regular basis. But, to Mr. Brown's point, yeah, I mean, it's obvious that the intent of this company today, that they're trying to make sure that they're tasteful and within some sort of reasonable color that's not bright out there fluorescent green, right? So I think that's definitely worth noting.
We went through this before with Red Rock Precision. So I told Carol when we started it, I says, hey, there's colors that you got to abide by. And when we did the Red Rock Precision sign, I don't know how long that's been there, but we had to come in with our colors, and it was a little different. Then there's a lady that had a keychain.
Yeah.
And it had all these colors on it. And then she just said, well, it fits in between these. And so you're good to go. So honestly, we thought it was going to be kind of the same thing.
It's because before we even presented it, we toned down just what we first presented, the RR. Those colors were way toned down to what we really are.
Yeah.
So, and then, so she brought in the swabs and she took more earth tones and found something that would be, better than what me and him actually had. So
Thank you. And I appreciate all the comments. I think this is important. This is how we can make the city better over time is it's not, these aren't our ordinances, they're our ordinances, the big hour. And we can make some revisions. I think Mr. Reese's recommendation is appropriate to maybe look at expanding the palette. There are additional considerations here that talks about signs that are out of character with those seen historically, any sign that visually overpowers the building. There's things like that are listed, but there is that subjective nature of this clearly, which I agree with Mr. Brown, who said we have some flexibility in that regard. It feels like we do, and if the city planners agreeing with us, then we have that authority. So, yes.
That argument is certainly a good one. I don't know that I agree with it. By opening that up, we will have this discussion with every sign that comes along. And I think there has been a palette set, guidelines that can be utilized, and I think we ought to stay with it.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, I fail to see where we're actually compelled to stick to this palette. I agree with what Mr. Hopkins is saying, but you know what? Maybe that's okay for everybody to come here and have us look at their sign and take that on. Again, we want businesses to come in, and maybe they do need that personal touch. Maybe it's obviously we felt and this was important enough to call a special session. So that's my feelings on this. If nobody can find anything different, I'll make a motion that we allow them to choose one or two of these colors and move forward with their project.
We have a motion on the table.
I'm not sure.
Were
One
you-
or two of what colors?
The two samples that they've provided here. No. I want to thanks for the clarification. Gecko looks like Sierra Whiskey 6719 and Sierra Whiskey 6718 overt green.
We have a motion on the table to approve that color as specified. Is there a second on the motion?
I second that we use overt green.
Okay, that's slightly different.
Okay. Would you say the other one?
Actually, overt green is fine with us.
So just for the second, though, if you want to make a friendly amendment, we can do that potentially. If you want to limit it to one, the motion was stated that either one of those would be appropriate.
Okay, I would second that as well.
Okay, so either to be appropriate. All right, any discussion on the motion? And just to clarify, the motion is for those two colors as specified. Either one could be used for the signage based on
I
what's
do
going
have
forward.
clarification. Are we making this decision or are we passing this on to the council?
This, I believe this is our
This is ours.
decision. Yes. Any other discussion?
For the future, I'll ask the planner, can we figure out the wordage in these codes? Because we spend a ton of time trying to get something standardized down there. And I think a lot of us had a vision in our head, kind of like they do in Park City or some of these other places. If you go to Sun Valley, there'll be a 7-Eleven and the thing's about that big, and I think that's kind of, anyway, for me, thinking about that was kind of the vision of what eventually Commercial Street, as it grows, we would like it to look like, from siding to windows to lights and whatever else. So can we put the the verbiage in there to not like what Mr. Hopkins says, we're going to have this discussion every single time. And so why have it?
I'm happy to talk with you about that a little bit because as I look at your code, it raises a lot of flags in my mind. If I can suggest, maybe we should talk about that once you've disposed of this, and then maybe we can take a few minutes and talk about that.
Thank you. Any other discussion before we vote on this motion?
Did I hear somebody request a friendly amendment for over
No,
green?
he accepted it as originally outlined.
Thank you.
No other discussion. Let's go ahead and vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? We have two nays, 4 votes in the affirmative. Motion passes. Thank you. And that concludes that agenda item, but I do want to follow up on what you were going to share.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time in the special meeting.
So to make that suggestion, I think the color palette's wonderful, just maybe a few more colors on it.
You want, now that it's all over with, I think you want people to go down the historic street and get the feel of the story, which I think it's got, but you want, businesses want to kind of, that's just me, they want to see great signs and stuff,
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, you guys. We really-
Thank you.
You need those colors blocked.
We returned them.
All right, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate your time.
So, Mr. Chair, if you're okay, what we're hoping to do is, go have Will talk about what he is anticipating doing with the planning commission, some training we're gonna be doing and things like that, so if you don't mind.
I'm good. I'm here.
I need to be excused.
Okay.
It's still a public meeting as long as they're sitting and convened.
Okay. All right.
And the next person wants to expand it differently, and the next person expands it differently.
Yeah.
I do have one quick comment to Mr. Woods' point. I think that was kind of the motif, the reasoning behind the palettes, kind of have a Park City flair or a Morgan flair, whatever it was. That's what I do recall.
Yeah, thank you. You're excused. All right, so we have two staff members want to talk to us. Wilf, you can go first.
Well, and maybe to carry on with the points, the questions that you raised. First of all, you don't know me, I don't know you very well, and so I don't want to make it seem like I'm here to tell you what to do, because that's not my intent at all. I'll just share with you a little bit of my experience that I've gleaned over the years of doing this, and then also I've been the legislative chair for the Utah chapter of the American Planning Association since about 1990, and have had a lot of involvement in writing and rewriting the state code, and and I do a lot of trainings. I give a legislative update every year, and then I do a lot of trainings, planning commission trainings. Ty and Teresa were saying that it might be good to do some here. And I do that for planning commissions, for individual planning commissions every so often. I just did one in Clearfield a few weeks ago, and going to be doing one down in Utah County in about 2 weeks. And so this is old stuff to me. But please don't take this as I'm here to, set you straight and tell you what to do. It's not that by any means. I'll just give you a little bit of the benefit of my experience. When I was in Salt Lake City, as I mentioned there, we had a historic district and a code that was, it was a whole book in and of itself. And there were a lot of issues with it. That historic district code, and it looks like this one, I don't know how long ago this was written. Ty, does anybody recall about how long ago this might have been written? It kind of fits a mold that I've seen from way back. And a lot of zoning codes were written this way, where they would have terms in them like it's compatible with the neighborhood character. or is similar to, or stuff like that. That gave a lot of flexibility to how you reviewed and approved projects that were before you. And quite frankly, at one point in time, probably way back when, that seemed to work okay. But over time, you would have some communities that would really take a hard line with that and really begin to cause some issues with the development community and cause a lot of what later became legal issues. And then there were some court cases and things that were later brought forward. And now it's actually entrenched in state code. And so what we do now, and I have a whole presentation on this because it was so important at this point from what was amended into the state code a couple of years ago. I call it plain language. You've got to use plain language. The basic idea, just underlying this, and I'm sorry to kind of get away, but we'll get back to the historic district content here in just a sec, but I want to give you a little bit of foundation on this. The basic idea, particularly in Utah and in a number of other states, is that private property rights are really important and really kind of key. But land use can be regulated in order to benefit the community, health, safety, and welfare. But because the private property rights are so important, when you do regulate it, you need to be very clear and very specific about what it is you're regulating. And if it's not clear, then according to the courts, and this was a court case that was decided in Utah County in the 90s and now has been encapsulated into the state code, when you have a difference of opinion, when you have a not real clear language, and a reasonable person can reasonably say, well, either one of those could really apply. Any number of choices or the two different choices could apply. What the state code now says is then the opinion of the applicant prevails. And so what that has led us as planners and as the legal advisors to the planners to say is, make your codes very clear and very specific, and don't have a lot of subjective and general language in there. Because if it's, you may wind up getting something that you didn't really intend or want. If it doesn't matter to you, then don't regulate it or don't say anything about it in your code. But if it does matter to you, be very clear and specific and not subjective. So to your point, which is, the language in this code is, there's a lot of subjective language in here, really subjective. That's not unusual. A lot of codes were that way, and a lot of them still are. But what we're saying to people now as planners and as the legal advisors are saying is, tighten up your codes. And so as for historic districts, what that really means is get more specific about all of the elements of the things that you want to see in your historic district. The downside of that is it probably makes your code really big and long and even complicated to some extent. But if that's the direction, if you want to see those things, that's probably the direction that you need to go. Because if you leave it fairly subjective, if you get to the point where you can look at something and say, yeah, well, I could see it could be that way or this way, but we get to decide, not according to state code, you don't anymore. According to state code now, the applicant gets to decide if it's subjective like that. So that's the nutshell. So happy to discuss this further.
We let her decide.
Yeah, but here's.
And actually, given the language in your code, that was appropriate.
That's exactly what we've done.
And here's the part that kind of set me sideways that day, last week. Well, I looked at it and I decided that this was going to be okay. And we asked her to meet us halfway. No, she didn't meet us anyway.
Hmm.
Those were the colors that she had, okay? And so it says in here, shall be reviewed, and I know it's not specific, and this is water on the bridge now, it's over, but we spent a lot of time on this, and so it would be really good to have this language, and I don't think this is tough language, and I'm a business owner, and I would have looked at this, the first thing I would have done is I would have come to this body and said, hey, I see this, can you give me kind of an idea here? But we wasn't given that option at all with these folks. They made the decision and then they told us, this is what we're gonna do. That's how I felt now. I can't speak for everybody else. So
Yeah, what-
I think we need to tighten up.
Then that's the thing. I think your code allows that. And if you're not comfortable with that, then yes, definitely it needs to be tightened
Well, if
up.
we're comfortable with them making the decision, this is a good code.
So I could probably chime in. So, not on the conversation, just kind of an update of where we're at as a city, because a lot of stuff happened in the last month without a lot of communication. So, I'm really excited, that we have Wilf on contract. Now he comes with a lot of experience. We had a planning position opened for a couple of weeks, got all the applicants that we could and didn't get anywhere near this level of expertise. And then we've done a contract. So to be fair to our other planners, is our contract never really allowed them to spend time updating our code, because we had them on a retainer to attend meetings and then do application revisions. But like Weston, he's right now full-time job, full-time planner. Steve, same thing. Steve Garside, he attends our meetings, gives us our opinion, but what we didn't have is really a contract in place that would allow you to leave a meeting like this, get to work on our code and do project-based work. It was really just kind of a time contract that we had. And so that's what we've done with Wilf, is we have a monthly contract that includes the meetings, the reviews, and then we also have an hourly rate for projects. And then he's also retired. So he has, at his semi-retired, he's still doing a lot of things, but he's set up as a consultant. And so I'm really excited about an opportunity that we have, that every time we've had a discussion, we've never really had the ability as staff to provide adequate follow-up and proposals. And we've had a lot of those conversations that we just keep kind of revising. The other thing to be aware of is the county historic society also doesn't like our historic code. So when I started as the city manager, we had that historic review committee, and you remember that process, and that was totally contingent on who was at the meeting, how that process went. And so we did say, hey, let's keep this at least in-house to the city, not a third party, and a separate meeting. We used to schedule separate meetings for your historic review outside of planning. And so we kind of streamlined it a little bit and kind of put you in an unfair position as planning commission, right? And I think it was brought up during this process, is like, hey, now this is up to us to add the consistency with the same code that Historic Society was operating off of. So they've taken the assignment as a separate group to review what they think would be appropriate historic code as a historic society. And they have a draft ready that they haven't shared with me, but they're working on a rewrite that's maybe more design oriented, more visual, and something that they also, as a historic society, through their lens view, this is how we view so we have a couple of things I think that can come together, in the next couple of months that will help maybe a lot of the pressures that we feel and the decision-making. I think a lot of that will kind of work itself out just process-wise. And so I don't know our code. I kind of appreciate the work that you all do. I just appreciate that Wilf is here, but he doesn't even know where we're at now in that process. But just as an update, we have the general plan. That's the general plan update still right now shows a historic district, but what that historic district means, we're going to get some input for a rewrite from the Historic Society. The Historic Society's been working with the state historian on how to make historic districts more of a opportunity than a restriction, right? So we're getting that counsel too about, hey, here's a menu of options that make it more of a proactive conversation instead of a restriction based, like, you know, do anything, but don't, like that color palette, like that's not a lot of options, right? It's nice that we have something on the books, but they look at it as the way that you preserve historic places is to give a menu of options that here's all of the things that fit, and one building doesn't necessarily detract from another. And you can have a historic district without necessarily making them all the exact same. I don't know what that looks like. I'm just telling you the concept that I've heard, you know, the way they approach it. The other thing that it does is it says, if your building happens to be historic, here's some opportunities for historic preservation, which is grants, and this is what we want to do is promote historic preservation. And if you're not, you know, if you're in a building that maybe doesn't have a lot of historic left, then it doesn't really apply to you. It's more encouraging those buildings that do have. So we'll see what that looks like. But I just wanted to give everybody kind of the overall, this is where we're at as a city. This is how Wilf kind of fits into the picture. And
I hope that they do something with that, because I'm just absolutely, totally against them making the decision.
the applicant.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
I think what we did tonight was absolutely wrong.
I wouldn't be that hard on yourselves, because as I looked at the thing, you know, when they talked about the accent color, and that color palette belongs to the building, it doesn't specifically go to the sign, but when you read the sign, it even allows neon. And I didn't know that until I was flipping through the thing right there.
I saw that.
Never once have our own thing says neon is permitted as an accent, right? I'm not sure we all have bought off on that concept, but there's enough conflicting things in our own code that's why when it gets that way, it should default to the applicant, but that doesn't mean we can't go forward and say, let's get this cleaned up and say what it is that we actually want. The other piece that I'd like to work on is the communication between Planning Commission and the City Council. We have two City Council members assigned as liaisons to Planning Commission, but we've never really had our planner in a position to broker those conversations. Like what does work is in City Council, we get a really good update on the discussion that happened in Planning Commission, but we haven't had a lot of back and forth on, as a Planning Commission, here's some concerns that we have, things we'd like to work on, but we've never sent that to City Council to see how they feel about, hey, would you like us to look into fencing and setbacks and other, you know, those sort of things. Nor have we had the City Council tasking the Planning Commission about their concerns in our own code. But it really takes somebody, it takes a dedicated staff person to broker all of those conversations. And so that's something else I look forward to in the future, so that we're, as you all serve, that we're all kind of moving into the same direction as a city. And to be honest, it's something I'm not qualified for. Like I know, like when I first started as the city manager, I have a lot of conversations where, oh good, Ty's here, he'll handle that. Ty's here, he'll handle that. And I do attend the meetings, but it really isn't my place. I really belong on the administrative side of the discussion, budgets and personnel. And I really look forward to having Teresa and Wilf work together on supporting the Planning Commission in that activity, you know, where we're headed. So that was way long-winded. I apologize, but I just thought I'd take an opportunity that we never have, you know, to kind of tell you where we're at.
Thank you, Ty. Mr. Mayor.
I don't know how many of you got your invitations today, or if you got one or not, but that master plan we've been working on, there's a meeting set up 2 weeks from this Thursday on the 16th. We'd love to have all you plan on being there to that. They're gonna present kind of where they're at with their phase of that master plan change. And that's an opportunity for this group to help us select what the future will be as we look at that new master plan. So that's on the 16th. Teresa can send it out to all of you if you didn't get that. But the whole community, public's invited to that meeting. We'd love to have you there at that one. Also, we talked earlier, Teresa has some, and we'll have some other kind of training that they would invite you to if you want to go. You obviously don't have to, but there's some other things available that the league puts out. We'll try and get that information to you as well. And we want to value your position, value your season, and the process of helping to move these pieces along. But I encourage you to plan on going that on the 16th at the meeting there. And Ty can tell you, or Teresa can tell you more about that. I just want to invite you to that. Let us know we appreciate your willingness to spend the time. And I think training is valuable and helpful.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I, well,
Please,
when you're ready.
Go ahead.
Well, so hopefully this is a quick question. So Commercial Street is like the only street right now where there's stuff going on. That's where businesses are going. You've got renovations on a few different storefronts right now. And so this question, this will come up again for sure. Is this the only body where they can come to initially for help to even put them in this direction? You know, if we really wanted to put this and help a lot of this go much faster, we would have given them that color palette, or someone from staff would have given them the color palette. I don't know if that they maybe did that. Did they do that before?
Yeah, this particular applicant had already been through the plan commission before for Red Rock, and they got 2 packets for this particular application.
Okay.
So they've received those.
So we have a process, we have a development review meeting where when someone has a project, they come to a development review meeting and say, this is what we're thinking about doing. And then we give them feedback on, you're gonna need to
Who's
go,
we? Who's in that?
the staff. So it includes all of our staff, but it's for projects that, like if it's a brand new build, it's just what we offer, but the engineer, water, sewer, power, the planner, the fire marshal, we all sit down with that applicant and then we say, oh, for this project, here's our concerns. The zoning doesn't fit. This doesn't work, right? And we give them a bunch of feedback so that they can move forward on their project. And
How do
so
they set that meeting up?
with
Just
Teresa.
call in and say,
Yeah.
Teresa, I'm looking at doing
So-
this. Okay.
So that is for a typical development. But if it's a business, so this business is renting a building that was already established, and
It's in that historic.
In the
Right.
historical designation.
and permitted.
yes.
So what happens though is everything's permitted other than if there's something that during the business license process that needs a conditional use permit, or like the part that needs historic review would come to planning commission. So there's a different path for every type of development based on what they have going on, right? We start from the top, and if it's like that fits the general plan, that has the correct zoning, that's a permitted use, then we go to work on just building permit, right? Like size, number of parking stalls. We go through that whole thing. And we have one actually that's being proposed that's totally permitted, other than the facade and the signage would need currently in our code to come to planning commission for just their facade, but not the building, because everything else is permitted. And so
It's not in the historic district?
the one being proposed will be in the historic district. So to your point, we're gonna keep doing this. But a lot of times, when they're doing a building permit, that whole process has nothing to do with colors, look, signage. They just go ahead and submit a building permit and they get started on it. And then, we say, well, before you wrap this up, you're gonna have to. But we don't say your building permit is contingent on your signage, right? It's already in process. They're building. So does that make sense?
It does. And this is what it comes down to. We want to be a business friendly place, right? We don't have enough businesses in Morgan. We want more businesses in Morgan, and we want the process to go as fast and as smooth as possible. If there are certain things that have to come to us, which we know that there are, let's do it. But case in point tonight, we had a special session because we really wanted to see someone who wanted and put the effort to get the business going. What can we do to help them get a quicker, faster start that gives them all this information and doesn't put us in a very awkward position
Right.
where we're like,
Well,
we want to, but
sure. One
here's this
thing,
thing.
so one thing we can do, and I talked earlier about how we had a historic committee that was a whole separate body, whole separate night and everything. We streamlined that. There's no, if you have good code and it's written, it doesn't have to be reviewed even by planning commission. You can have a staff, we can write a code that says, our planner will review it and make the decision. And then what we could do is say, yeah, it either fits or it doesn't. The consistencies, it's right here. And if what we could do is say, but if the applicant disagrees with the decision of the planner, then we would come here for, hey, does this really fit the intent or something in that nature?
So we can write the code that basically gives that authority there because we've already set the guidelines and that can be taken care of.
Right.
That makes sense.
Right. So you can streamline it, or you can make it as like, you can place that decision point anywhere you want. Well, the city council can, right? Because we would only say, here's what our recommended process is and our ordinances. But that is another direction to go, is just to say, because that's what we did with Steve on a lot of things. It's like, it's building permit. They're putting something up. Hey, does that material work? Well, is it metal? Is it, whatever, at whatever percentage? And then we would just have Steve give an interpretation. But because, and anywhere else in town, that's exactly what we would be doing. It's just the historic code specifically says it comes to planning commission. So, there's a whole menu of options as we move forward. I'm not necessarily saying, I'm saying that that's the direction. You know what I mean? But streamlining and decision-making can all be included in the way we update our ordinances as well as processes.
But as it stood tonight, if I had the attitude of these two people, I wouldn't even come to this meeting. I'd have just turned in my sign. Here's my sign. There you go. I mean, we didn't really accomplish really anything. I mean, they just kind of said, these are our colors. Same as we had a week ago. This is what we want, and this is what we're gonna have. And there's really nothing that you guys can do about it.
And have no real concern about this.
And I'm not beating up on those two people
No,
individually. I'm just saying, until we get this thing down.
Yeah.
Either we have a historic district or we don't.
And she made
Irregardless
probably
of who
the
wants to
best,
make the business.
she made one of the best comments when they left. They said, well, really, you just need to expand your palette a little bit to have a little bit more colors. And I looked at Jim and I says, yeah. And then the next person, they want to expand it just a little bit.
Well, and not necessarily, because what we found, or my interpretation of what just happened, was that the palette deals with the building facade, not specifically signs. The sign part of our historic district has a lot more flexibility, right? And so what we were doing, we were applying a color palette to signs, and it didn't specifically say that was, the discrepancy in our own codes is what we just discovered, right? Right. And so, yeah, maybe that is a really good color palette, but what we need to do is clean up the language of what it applies to, what it doesn't apply to.
Yeah, because as it states, it says design color palette instead of saying building color palette. Maybe something as simple as that. And when another planner is saying design is everything,
But,
and yet there's a sign portion. It's just.
but to Wes's point, that's, we don't always get to choose the applicant, and as staff, when they do building permits, we have a whole menu of people that are like, just wanting to make the best product. And they come with like, hey, we're soliciting some input. And it's even like, hey, if I put my entrance here, what do you think? And the staff are more than welcome to be like, well, that really doesn't work because of the, stuff that we know about. And then there's other people that say, I don't care. This is what I want to do, even though it's a train wreck waiting to happen. And we get that same thing, but then it just puts us in a position where we, as staff, have to say either it fits or it doesn't as far as our code, and you don't always end up with the best outcome, but sometimes we have to say,
So
this is what we can hang our hat on.
And I think we're just really guilty of thinking that we give kind of a broad kind of guidelines on it and what we was thinking it should look like. And they just said, we're really glad that you think it should look like that, but we want it to look like this.
Well,
and that's it.
I think we gotta be fair. So one, I proposed a larger color palette. Seriously, like within a few minutes of me looking at it, our color palette is tiny. I mean, we're talking hundreds of colors that are all it's like the color white. There's like 100 different white colors, right? We weren't even close with that color palette with other cities that are doing that. I bet if you pulled the one, I couldn't find the Park City one or the Sun Valley one, but I guarantee if they have one, it's not limited to those 10 colors. And the second thing is, if they really were trying to just say it doesn't matter here, they would have gone with fluorescent green, which they didn't do. So I think we got to be a little fair to them that they at least tried to tone it down to a degree. Because otherwise, you're right. They could have said, you guys have no authority. It's not in the code. We're going with fluorescent green and it's tough.
But she told me the last meeting, I asked her, you already chose your color? She said, yes. I says, are you willing to meet us halfway? She said, no. And I'm not beating up on these people. And I heard out in the hall last week that everybody knows these folks and you're in the same ward with these folks. And even Jim says, I feel really kind of at a struggle here. And I says, well, I don't know these folks. So, and I'm not trying to be ornery. I'm like George, I want to not have this, and let's get it to where we don't have to be the strong arm here on,
Amen.
because I
Yes.
come there sometimes, and it's hard.
So I'm gonna,
So that's it. That's the
Or
conflict.
somewhere in that code, when I was reading it, when it was up there, the code says something to this effect. We encourage signs to be exciting and promote business so that business can be successful. And that's right in the code. And so-
And it says the purpose of the sign is to, number one, draw attention.
Draw
and
attention.
Number two, communicate, right? So
Right.
it's like draw attention and
When-
then
when you read that
communicate,
in
this
the
is what the
code, what they-
business
It's
It's bad
does.
code. It's just not good code.
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
let
but
me
sign
jump in
code's
at this
different.
point.
But the-
We've established that the code needs some work. I think that we've all agreed on that. Let's leave it at that for tonight. I don't know that we're bringing up any new points at this juncture. But let's put that on the agenda so that we can make a difference on this code and hopefully correct
Well, I
what
would
we ran
hope we would
into.
have a historic district that looks historic and
Yes.
not modern.
I got one more thing to add. My wife's worked for the city government for over 30 years. And when she heard that he was going to be our city planner, you thought it was Christmas morning. She said, Wolf is the man. And he is the man. And we are so lucky to have him in Morgan City to help us. So that was she worked for Gary Crane for 25 years. Her name's, Denise Woods. Now she works here.
aboard.
Yeah.
All right.
That's the old guy. Been around so long.
Yeah.
No, I have to say that when Denise says, oh yeah, Gary Crane, she talked to Wolf, I'm like, oh my heck. Because he's been the president of the APA as well. Every time I've ever had a legislature that you can't understand legislature ever, anytime. Wolf always does meetings after meeting where you as a planner or city staff or whatever can go and say, what does this mean? Well, we don't know either. No, he said that before, but he
Welcome.
helps you understand
Let's,
those
we
things,
need
but-
to adjourn formally. Let someone move to adjourn.
So
Yes. I make a motion to adjourn.
A meeting is adjourned.